Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining us today. On behalf of USAID and ResilienceLinks, I welcome you to our theme month webinar on food system resilience, elusive concept or actionable framework. I'm Jamie Charles with ResilienceLinks. Before we begin, let me orient you to the Zoom platform. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see most of your controls. First, please use the chat to introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from. To ask questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A button. We are recording this webinar and will email you the post-event resources shortly following the event. You can also find the resources on ResilienceLinks.org. Next slide, please. Let's briefly look at today's agenda. After some opening remarks from the Center for Resilience, we will hear introductions for today's speakers. Then our three speakers will share their brief technical presentations before we open the floor to take questions from the audience. Our host, Herman Brower, will then provide some closing remarks to conclude our event today. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attendance, and I'll now pass it to Carol Jenkins, Resilience and Agriculture Advisor for USAID's Center for Resilience.
Greetings and welcome to all. I'm happy to provide a few framing remarks about the importance of resilience in agri-food systems and to welcome our three speakers who will delve deeper into this topic. As a reminder, if we could go to the next slide, you will see USAID's formal definition of resilience on the screen. However, simply put, resilience is the ability to manage shocks and stresses without compromising future well-being. Resilience in the context of agri-food systems refers to understanding potential risks that farmers, agri-processors, transporters, and those who operate within the system may face while delivering food from the farm to the plate. Resilience is about understanding those potential risks and building skills, approaches, and laws where necessary to assist all those working in the agri-food system to withstand shocks and stresses while maintaining their essential functions. Resilience is about building systems that are adaptable, robust, and sustainable, capable of bouncing back from disruptions while continuing to provide affordable, nutritious, and safe food for all. USAID is a learning agency, and it has evolved its thinking about resilience, agriculture, and how we engage across the entirety of the food system. Back in 2012, our original resilience policy set out to reduce humanitarian needs by helping people withstand shocks and stresses such as natural disasters and chronic food insecurity. Our revised resilience policy, which is currently being finalized, keeps these original values, but broadens them to include every component of USAID's portfolio. We've realized that the outcomes of every USAID program, no matter the sector, face risks that need to be able to manage future shocks and stresses if they are to sustainably achieve their goals. USAID is asking partners to take a risk-based approach to programming within all sectors, to look at the potential threats to health, education, governance, economic growth, agriculture, and natural resource management. We ask you to work within the communities and with the public and private sector to identify your desired outcomes, and then work with the groups to examine potential threats to achieving those outcomes. We request that you then design activities in a way that prepares people to manage their risks so that they can achieve more sustainable development outcomes. And by people, I mean whoever you work with, households, communities, businesses, systems, and entire countries. Basically, we are asking you to identify anything that stands in the way of success within your sector. And based on that information, you support local communities and host governments to develop ways to overcome those challenges. We can no longer make assumptions that pandemics, food price shocks, increases in fertilizer and fuel prices, droughts or floods will not happen and not affect the communities where we work. Unfortunately, with the increased complexity of the development arena, we are seeing an increase in households experiencing multiple shocks. And this was most recently demonstrated by farmers being hit by the 3 Cs: climate, COVID, and conflict. Any single one of these events will cause challenges, but combined, they can cause populations to be overwhelmed and can erase our programmatic achievements. I would like us to think about how we program today to help our farmers and those working in the agri-food system to be better prepared for the complexity of multiple shocks as they hit a single household, business, community, or system. I challenge each of our speakers to help us understand not just what has worked in the good times, but also what has worked in those moments when the agri-food system was at its most stressed and hit by significant shocks and stresses. Now I'll hand over to Herman Brauer, who will introduce our speakers.
You're muted, Herman.
Hello, everybody. There's always somebody who has to discover the mute button somewhere. Today, that's me. I'm a senior advisor and researcher on food systems and multi-stakeholder collaboration based in Wageningen, in the Netherlands, at Wageningen University Research, and very welcome to this webinar. I have the honor to introduce three panelists to you who will share something about their work and also some provoking ideas and questions around food system resilience. And you will be aware that the term and the terminology of food systems has become very prominent in the run-up and after the Food System Summit in 2021. And at the same time, there's a rediscovery at this moment that the whole body of work around resilience is actually very needed and extremely relevant, also in the domain of food systems. And it's like these two domains of thinking and practice haven't been talking for a long time to each other. And I think this webinar is a great opportunity to connect those two bodies of knowledge and also to get a conversation going about how this concept can be put into practice and can help us to deliver to change food system outcomes towards the objectives that we're setting. Now, the three panelists in the order that you will hear them speak are, first of all, next slide, Dr. Bart de Steenhuis-Pieter. He is a senior food system scientist, also from Wageningen University Research. So he's one of my close colleagues. He's also Wageningen's ambassador for food and nutrition security, and he's done a lot of work in research projects and development projects in Africa and Asia. And he's working in the area of food system governance, political economy, and he's studying processes of transformation towards more sustainable, resilient, and equitable food systems. And so that's our first contributor. And after that, I'm also very honored to have Dr. Ones Carujo in our midst. He's the head of resilience and food systems at WFP's Regional Bureau for West and Central Africa. So he's based in Dakar. And Ones has more than 25 years experience in different parts of agri-food systems, agricultural value chains, and including strategic guidance, technical advice, and working with the strategic and operational partnerships of WFP. And prior to that, he's got lots of experience with AGRA as a director of value chains, also with TechnoServe and with Food for the Hungry. And our third speaker is, I'm also very, very pleased that Dr. Namukolo Kovic is in our midst. She's the director of ILRI, that's the International Livestock Research Institute. And she's the Director General's representative to Ethiopia. So she's joining us from Addis Ababa, if I'm right. And prior to working with ILRI, she used to work as a senior research coordinator at IFPRI, another CGIAR institute, as many of you will know. And Namukolo is a multidisciplinary academic who's both been working in crop science, extension, in animal science, as well as nutrition. And so she is in a unique position to address the dynamics of food system transformation from different fronts. And besides all of the work that she's been doing with the government of Ethiopia, it's also interesting and important to mention that she leads the governance working group of an independent expert group that emerged from the UN Food System Summit. And that working group is developing a monitoring framework on food system transformation to guide progress on the SDG countdown to 2030. So all three of you are very much welcome, and we look forward to your contributions. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Bart de Steenhuizen-Pieters for your first presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Herman, and also Carol for introducing the subject of today. And yeah, I'm particularly happy that so many people have joined the conversation today, because it allows me to share a few of my insights with you, but also to learn from you, because I have to admit that we at Wageningen, we have taken up this subject of resilience in food systems, but we're not far from having completed our journey to understanding fully how to understand the issue, but even more how to apply it and help you apply it in your realities. And maybe we are only halfway, and therefore sharing some of our thoughts now today also allows you to share your thoughts about it and help us learn how to go further beyond the theory and conceptualization into the area of application. And please do not refrain from criticizing or sharing your ideas about where we are today with the application of the concepts that have been developed so far. So I'm going to share with you, maybe first slide, please, a little bit my journey into the world of food system resilience, which actually started just before the summit that Herman already introduced, when resilience entered the field of food systems. But next slide, please. That issue of resilience was very well known long time ago, maybe already 100 years ago. Scientists were talking about resilience, and even before the scientists, resilience was known, of course, as an issue, but not in terms of food system, but among scientists that were kind of discovering, for example, biology or in population dynamics. Resilience was already known as something important to other subjects in science, and even in medical science or humanity, there was already talking about and reference to resilience. But just before the summit, we were talking about more and more about resilience, and as COVID was already also hitting the food systems in the world, this emerged as a very critical issue that we needed to study further. And we were invited by our ministry to help them understand how does that concept of food system resilience has to be understood and brought to the area of policy. And we discovered indeed that there was actually very little agreement about what actually means food system resilience to scientists, let alone to policymakers. And there was so much confusion about just the definition of it. And that created a lot of confusion also among policymakers. So what we did at Wageningen, we dived into the topic and we looked into literature and we tried to bring to policymakers something more about the cohesion of definitions and how to understand that concept, just to make communication possible between science and policymakers. Next slide, please. So what we did is we tried to simplify all these concepts that were going around, confusing the communities, but bringing it to the essence. And we thought, well, let's put it this way. Building food system resilience is actually necessary to make communities and food systems withstand shocks and stresses that maintain the progress towards desired outcomes of a food system. That's why it's so important. So we have to understand the basics of a food system, which is actually the sum of its activities and actors bringing food from production to consumers. Basically, if you bring it to the simplicity of the concept, food systems are not much more than that. And those activities altogether with the actors are driven by the socioeconomic drivers or environmental drivers. And if they work all well together, they are capable of delivering certain outcomes to society, not only food, but also, for example, employment and all kinds of impacts to the environment. But all of a sudden, if a shock hits that particular food system, that delivery of outcomes cannot be assured anymore. And that's where we position the impact of these shocks, and that's what we can call then indeed resilience or non-resilience of a system. Next slide, please. So how can we then create that coherence in definition? Well, we at Wageningen, we propose this particular definition of food system resilience, and we want to keep it as simple as possible. So we understand food system resilience as the capacity of a food system to deliver the desired outcomes in the face of shocks and stressors. Well, if we apply this one, it's a very simple definition that we can apply in any situation. And the delivery of such desired outcomes depends on that capacity of a food system to anticipate, prevent, absorb, or adapt to the impacts of shocks and stresses. Now, and from the vast literature that we processed on resilience from all these different fields of science, from population dynamics and biology and even medical science, we identified 4 capabilities that are always strongly correlated to resilient systems. And I'm referring to any system, not only food systems, because that literature was very limited. So systems in general have 4 capabilities which are always associated to systems which are very resilient. So let me introduce these 4 capabilities. Next slide, please. So systems that prove to be very resilient have always a high level of agency, which means the capacity of its actors in that particular system to mitigate the risks and to respond to shocks, that capacity. Second capability is the ability to create buffers in the system. And that can be applied even to populations of ants, of animals, but in our particular case, of course, it's a food system. So the capability to buffer foods or other assets. The third capability of a very resilient system is the ability to connect within the system or to connect to parts of other systems. And the third one is actually diversity. Resilient systems always have a high level of internal diversity. And if you would apply that to a food system, it applies to human beings being capable of creating diverse supplies of food and income. Very simple. Now, next slide, please. So these 4 ABCDs help us understand how a food system can become very resilient to shocks. And if they are absent, it also shows that a system doesn't have that resilience. So it can also help us from a conceptual phase, from a conceptual understanding of food system resilience, to a more applicable level of understanding food system resilience, to apply it and diagnose why a system is maybe not resilient. So can we apply these ABCDs as capacities of a system to understand what's the matter with a system that is not so resilient to external shocks? So now we are at the stage in Wageningen that we are applying the concept, and we ask ourselves, can we diagnose a system using these ABCDs? And basically we are looking at a particular food system. Does it have enough agency? Does it have enough buffering capacity? Does it have enough connectivity? Or is it enough diverse in its supply of food and income to the people? And that has to, we can apply it at the right level, at the household level, the community level. And that depends, of course, at what level you would like to intervene. So the next question is indeed, why would you like to apply such a diagnosis, or why would you like to enhance this resilience of a food system? And that's a very important question. And we have therefore as a suggestion that before doing any analysis on food system resilience, you ask yourself 5 questions. For whom do you do that? For what purpose? Why, where, and when? And those 5 W's are very important to provide a meaning to your analysis. Then you could step into the next phase of whether you can design your interventions using these ABCDs. Because in the end, the application is in the design of meaningful interventions that enhance the capacity of the actors in your system and see if you can enhance their agency, buffering capacity, the connectivity or diversity. And then in the end, of course, you would like to know if you can also monitor and evaluate your interventions. Next slide, please. So this brings me to my conclusions. So food system resilience only makes sense if you can really define it well. And if you can't define it, you can't measure it. Food system resilience is about the capacity of people in your system and not just an outcome. If you would like to apply it, the ABCD provides you at least with some reference, and it is good enough to help you apply it. We don't have to walk the whole final mile of understanding food system resilience until we understand 100% of it. That's basically what the science world is trying to do at this moment. But explaining approximately 70% of it is good enough. And then before all, it's very important to ask yourself, why am I doing it? Next slide, please. And my final slide is indeed that you can use it for diagnosing the capacities of human beings in your system, whether they have enough capacity to build that resilience that is required to withstand shocks. And indeed, if so, then you can design your interventions, you can measure them within their context, and of course, be aware that resilience is indeed a property of a system which may be as important as, for example, creating efficiency, which has inspired us a long time as the single purpose of creating very efficient food systems. But food system efficiency is nowadays not the only and most important purpose of, for example, value chains, but making these value chains of food systems also resilient may be as important as, for example, efficiency. Thank you very much for your time. And I would like to hand over now to Dr. Ones for his presentation.
Thank you, Bart. That was very insightful. I would like to welcome everyone. And my name is Ones Karuho. I'm head of resilience and food systems for WFP Regional Bureau for Western Africa. I'm based in Dakar. As Bart said, let's start by see how we apply this concept or this framework to the work we do in Western Africa. Let's go to the next slide and I'll give you the lay of the land first. We are talking about a region that actually transcends 5 agroecological zones. And we have different issues in this region, including desertification. As you can see, we are moved. Sahara is expanding to the Sahel, and Sahel is also expanding down south. And that comes with a lot of issues related to food security. In addition to land that is being degraded, we have also issues related to economic shocks, especially in the coastal countries. But as you know, we have also armed conflict, very active armed conflict. And it was shocking to hear even from an article from Washington Post recently talking about 25% of young people who join this armed group see that as another opportunity for work opportunity, not necessarily the ideology. And we have a lot of people risking their lives to migrate to Europe. So looking at this region as a whole, food systems are not really delivering the outcomes that we could expect, including climate-related outcomes. As you know, you probably know that there are some reports talking about the region losing 10 million hectares every year. And this is really a critical issue to be looked at and strengthen the resilience of these systems, food systems in this region. And when we look at resilience for whom, we actually deployed an integrated resilience program to ensure that we are looking at people, especially school goers, young children who are in school. When a shock takes place, they tend to drop out to go and help their families to look for food. So a program is strengthening resilience, but with other components to ensure that children are also in school through school meal program. They can continue to study. But also at household levels, they need, in addition to the assistance we provide as humanitarian agency, we also work to ensure that they have access to productive assets, especially land that they can rehabilitate and they start growing food and fodder for their animals, as we have pastoralist communities in this region. Making sure that we have a community in our site, ensure that there are activities that we are doing together. We run some studies with collaboration with the IFPRI, showing that some of the land rehabilitation activities we do with communities are also strengthening their social cohesion. But looking at a system as a whole to ensure that these systems are resilient when there are shocks and stressors. As you know, in this region, we actually have between 110 million people whose food systems are under stress every year, and the 10 million that are in another category, IPC category 3 to 5. This is a classification of, looking at different food security situations, and they classify them so towards famine as well. So when shocks happen, we would like to make sure that we respond with emergency, but we are not satisfied because some of these shocks are recurrent and they happen every year. That's the reason why WFP is heavily investing in resilience. And by the way, the focus is to make sure that we are reducing the need for humanitarian food assistance. If we go to the next slide, I can show you how we are adopting an integrated approach. Again, the application of the framework that Bart presented, you can see that the agency capacity, making sure that there is a capacity to retain children and continue to go to school, but also households being whose capacity are being strengthened to ensure that they have access to productive assets, but also when the crisis hit, they are not selling their productive assets, especially animals. So we do all this to ensure that we have components of school feeding programs, land rehabilitation, looking at climate change, but also social protection systems where we work with the governments to ensure that there is enough safety net when, to fall back to. Let's go to the next slide, which is a summary and how we apply this model. So with the agency, I've just talked about different categories and levels where we intervene to enhance the capacity of actors. But BAFA also, we have been working with different partners to roll out Africa risk capacity. This is an insurance scheme or policy that helps government to respond directly and faster because they have the resources under that scheme. If we look at connectivity, which is the third component of the framework, again, social cohesion, because once a crisis hits, you've got to see if you can, lean on your neighbor. So that's really strengthened there. social cohesion, but also bringing in other actors to create resilience coalitions that support the region as a whole. Diversity, that's where the integrated approach is very important to ensure that as you strengthen the capacity of households and communities, but also you have other components that are keeping children in school through school meals. I will stop there and then cross over to East Africa to hear from Namkolo, who is going to look at how this framework is being applied in Ethiopia. Back to you, Namkolo.
Thank you very much, Onis, and thank you for the organizers of the webinar for inviting me to be here today. So I'm going to focus more on looking at how some of this applies and how it has been implemented in Ethiopia. So next slide. So Ethiopia faces multiple resilient challenges, and the images you see around is drought in the Horn of Africa part of Ethiopia in Borena, drought also in some of the more productive areas. You can see that dried up maize field. Recently, we also had a big infestation of locusts. And then after the drought that we had for 5 consecutive years, we're now having a lot of rain and flooding taking place. So in this context, we have multiple resilience challenges, as I've indicated: poverty, climate change, internal conflicts, external conflicts, and then, of course, resource limitations and others. In terms of both internal and external conflicts, we are all aware there has been some war in Ethiopia, but we are also aware that the war going on in Sudan is sending refugees into the same countries. So in responding to the question of food systems resilience, I'm saying it's difficult but complex. And then it is, however, actionable, an actionable framework, but this requires adequate resources and an iterative resourcing perspective. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to concentrate on only 2 examples that apply to Ethiopia, and I use these examples only because of time constraints. The first is the Ethiopia Productive Safety Net Program, which is being implemented through funding from multiple partners, the World Bank, USAID, and others. It's being implemented both in rural and urban settings. It's a large-scale social protection program to improve food security by stabilizing asset levels to enhance resilience. In the urban centers, they are focusing on improving savings, developing skills, encouraging self-employment as a way of bringing resilience to households. Then there is an element of disaster risk management. It is a mix of public works employment and unconditional transfers. So there are cash transfers that are provided, and in some cases, food vouchers are now also included. There has not been any demonstrated effect on nutrition outcome as one of the areas, and because of this, there has been evaluations that have resulted in the program being reformulated to include greater nutrition sensitivity, but the resources limit coverage and as a result, potential for impacts. However, the public works perspective of it, you can actually see impacts on infrastructure development. So you see roads coming up, you see irrigation facilities coming up because of the program. Next slide. The second example that I want to give is the Sakota Declaration. which has just completed its innovation phase and is now in an expansion phase. Now, this one is a really interesting one. In 2018, Ruel et al. At IFPRI released a publication in which they actually lamented the difficulty of reducing stunting using nutrition-sensitive agriculture. But based on the Scotta Declaration and the multi-sectoral nature of that program, the recent evaluation of the innovation phase that covered 40 waradas, which are equivalent to districts, this program has actually demonstrated reduction in stunting for under 2-year-olds, and really an impressive reduction in stunting of 3% per year. It's probably one of the highest that I have seen so far in my career. This approach has been included as a game changer in Ethiopia's food systems transformation roadmap that was developed in response to the UN Food Systems Summit. It also includes an index-based livestock insurance to reduce climate-related risk in pastoralist settings. The images you see there is because this also incorporates public works. What you are seeing is a dam that has been built to improve food security through irrigation, but also elements of water capture to recharge groundwater tables. Below that, you see an image of women involved in integrated nutrition-sensitive agriculture activities. And it is through these that we are seeing these reductions in stunting. Next slide. Here, what you see is Ethiopia's food systems transformation pathway and roadmap, and it's the vision, a vision of bringing about a holistic transformation of Ethiopia's food systems from production to consumption, and bringing on board the different elements that require resilience, diets, livelihoods, greater land preservation, restoration, greater resilience to shocks and stresses. And so it speaks very well to both the productive safety net program as well as the Scotta Declaration. Now, in the next slide, with the multiple challenges that are being faced, what we are now seeing is bringing on board the nexus of humanitarian development and peace as an important approach to incorporate in both perspectives. And so save lives, bring on board food systems transformation, bring resilience via that route. And then the peace bit of the nexus is an area now where there's a lot of government interest, NGOs, including the Scotta Declaration now is speaking on bringing peace into that nexus of their work. These three pillars are important for resilience, and bringing them together will actually help in terms of how we move forward. But what we see now is challenges in how do we bring in this greater integration of peace into this nexus. And that's an area that requires a lot of attention now. Thank you. And I pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Namukolo, and also to Ones and to Bart for your insightful contributions, and also the rich depth of the cases. We understand that from even the short presentations that you've got a lot of in-depth experience in how to apply some of these concepts, and also you being honest about the challenges in making this work in very challenging environments as well. is, of course, something that I pick up from all three presentations. Now is the time for questions and answers. And if, in case you haven't discovered, at the bottom, you will see the Q&A button where you are able to post your question that we'll monitor. And Jamie is actually going to help me in trying to get some of your questions, we hope as many as possible, to our speakers so that we can have a conversation around it. And actually, there is one question that I'd like to start with that has come from Samuel Maliamungo. And it's a question I'd like to pose it to all three speakers, and whoever feels first inclined to answer, please do so. The question is, how can we ensure that the concept of food system resilience is less confusing and clear among humanitarian and development practitioners, and that it trickles down to the affected communities or agency? So anybody who would like to take this question, it's really about how can we ensure clarity and less confusion with this concept?
Well, if I may, just to start off, this conversation is exactly the motivation why I explore the application of food system resilience. And the first obstacle that I discovered was indeed that we are confusing each other too much and too long with the different concepts which are on the table. And even the other day, Herman, we were in a conference in Rome not so long ago, and we met with the WFP and others, and FAO and others, and they asked for a kind of a paper, background paper. That background paper already introduced maybe at least 12 concepts on food system resilience, and I don't think that that really helps. So I would like to really advocate for, let's stop developing concepts that explore further to explain food system resilience, but let's put our heads together and agree what is the basics of food system resilience and develop more common understanding and a narrative that helps us communicate about it. And if we can't do that, it's going to be also very difficult to agree and to share this understanding with communities that we would like to involve. And that's why that is really a plea to bring about that mutual understanding so we can talk about it and communicate about it. And if we don't, then we keep on confusing each other.
Thank you very much, Bart. And Ones and Namukolo, would you want to add anything from your perspective about the usefulness and the clarity of the concepts we're using?
Yeah, I think it's very important to identify and understand the entry point. I mean, you say yourself that you are going to strengthen the resilience of food system in particular geography or community, but where do you start? And then when you start, what can go wrong? Or what are other elements that you need to be in place for you to be successful, for that intervention to be successful? Then you start looking at issues as a system, knowing that it's not an island, it's something that is connected to each other. That's the reason why we probably gave cases to see how we apply this food system resilience. But keeping in mind that the 5 questions that Bart started with are also very important. Why are you doing it, for whom? And when do you need it to come in? And when do you need it to get out? And what do you do? And what are the partners? So I think those are basic questions that can help us to visualize what can go wrong and how can we strengthen the system, especially for actors within the food system.
Thank you, Ones. Namukolo, you want to follow up on this question?
Yeah, I think, I mean, terminologies are terminologies, right? But I mean, if communities become more resilient, usually it's visible in their ability to withstand shocks. And so whatever you call something, doesn't really matter. I think what is important is following those principles. I really like what Bart did in his presentation by making reference to agency, buffering, connectivity, and capacity. If we did nothing else, but took those capabilities as our measure of where we are going and if we are actually making a difference, that will actually help. When I look at the two examples that I gave in my presentation, the one Sequoia declaration that has shown impacts on nutrition, which is usually difficult from agriculture intervention, has applied those 4 principles much better than the productive safety net program. So by looking at some of these principles and not necessarily just focusing on definitions of resilience and whatever, we can actually bring better impacts. And people can understand those principles more than they will understand the definition that you might give them. Thank you.
Well, thank you. May I add, Herman, two particular things which I've learned myself. One is that these 4 things, these 4 capacities, they are human beings. They relate to human beings. So the food system is often very, very abstract. But if we apply them to the ABCDs, everybody understands that. So we make it very tangible. And those are actually the resilience capacities themselves. But let's not forget, they will impact on what we call the outcomes of the system. So the outcomes are indeed, if we enhance the agency of people, can we see that in more stable food supplies at the end of the food system? Or can we see that in more stable income or in more secured sustainability? So every capacity in the system that we can enhance will, if we do it well, have an impact on these outcomes. So these outcomes are in the end the goal. The capacity itself is a means to stabilize what we hope the system will deliver to society. So yes, you can measure the outcomes, and they will provide maybe indicators. But in the end, if you want to intervene, you should not intervene at the outcome level, which is often a technical thing. I don't think you will then achieve your goal. You must intervene in the system on this agency, buffering, connectivity, or diversity. That's the point we would like to make. Therefore, many projects that focus only the technical intervention on the outcomes will not achieve really resilience of the system.
Thank you, Bart. I think there's a question from Cynthia Neudorfer that actually follows really nicely on the conversation we're now having. And I'd like to read her 2 questions, actually. They're 2 long sentences, so please bear with me. So Cynthia is asking, how are you incorporating thinking about poverty traps and ensuring you are not building resilience of a maladaptive system? Where the focus should perhaps be more on transforming the food system and not further building the resilience of the maladaptive dimensions of the food system. Now, Namukolo, Ones, or Bart, who would like to respond to this question? Yeah.
So both examples that I gave have got very strong gender components. You will have seen in one of the images that I used that there were actually women looking at poultry activities. So there are specific activities targeting women, empowering them, being part of developing servings and what have you. I think so that aspect is being covered. One of the things that the Productive Safety Net program has done is, because it's a public works program, to take care of women's needs, they have included, for example, for you to get the cash transfers, you're supposed to work on the public works projects. But during pregnancy and allowing the mothers to breastfeed, they're not required to do that, but they will still get the cash transfers, so they're protected. So there are multiple ways in which they are bringing in that elements. The challenges usually have to do with limited resources from government. The need is much greater than the resources that are available. So that's where the bigger challenges actually come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Namokolo. There's a different set of questions, and I'd like to try to summarize a couple of questions that I saw in the chat, and maybe also alert to Ones that maybe I'm very interested to hear your perspective on these questions. They all somehow relate to the role of the private sector in resilience building. So there's a question from Vineshkan Tevaraj, and his question is, how does private sector collaboration work here? Or has it worked in these type of programs? So from some of the cases, and perhaps later on, Namokolo, you can also come in with some of your examples from Ethiopia. But that's one very specific question. And there's other questions as well from, for example, Oluchi Esekanaha, and who is asking, where does market system resilience fall into this discussion about food system resilience? Most frameworks seem to leave that out entirely. So the whole role of market system resilience. And I know that within USAID and with the Resilience Bureau, there is a lot of expertise and discussion on market system resilience. So are these two conversations kind of happening in parallel from each other, or are they somehow linked? And I think that also really speaks to the role of the private sector in this sector. So maybe Ones, if I can ask you to respond first, and then maybe others can chip in as well.
Yeah, thank you. As I said during my presentation, we are focusing on West Africa, and especially in the Sahel. And when we do, our entry point is land rehabilitation, or restoration of ecosystems. And when we do that, we need the private sector to provide solutions. Again, the water table is high enough so that we can pump out water for micro irrigation or dam for animals and so forth. So we needed those solutions, especially solar power solutions. And we also do a lot of work with the food processors, who are private sector, of course, and not only to supply nutritious food to our operations, but also to develop mass market or commercial markets, so that we can take a proactive action to ensure that the food, safe and nutritious food, is available to communities. With regard to market systems, again, the basic concept of demand and the supply, and here we are talking about demand and the supply for safe and nutritious food. And there are many things that are interlinked to those two fundamentals. Our issue is to make it available, but also affordable. So working with the private sector and communities that are working to make that food available to meet the demand for food is very critical. So the concept of market systems is at the core of food systems. When you move from concept and you get into action, that's where you realize that the food system, market system, is very important in terms of operationalizing even the food system concept. Back to you, Herman.
Maybe I can make two remarks, Herman. And those are also learnings from our research. One is indeed these ABCD, they speak to everybody in the system and to all segments in society. Agency is about smallholders or consumers getting their act together, but also private sector supplying consumers. That's also about buffering. Do these private sector have the capacity to buffer particular food stocks? That's also buffering. Or connectivity. Connectivity is about people having, for example, cell phones to connect in case of trouble. Can they call for help? And that links particular actor groups in society to each other. So it is about actor-oriented resilience. And the second one is indeed, it also points about private sector, yes, being key actor segments in the system, but also a challenge because most of them are operating in the informal economy. And then many interactions are based on formality and formal economic actors, and especially evaluation concepts require data which are drawn from formal surveys, which exclude informal actors. So there is a particular challenge, especially when you apply this food system resilience concept, to involve these informal actors into food system resilience building. And then it's extremely important to apply these 5W questions: why you do it, and with whom do you do it, and to apply your concept within context. And especially if you want to measure it, you need to go into the context and go for a few indicators which you negotiate, which you can apply, which you can measure without going into data which actually have excluded the key actors in your system. And I am strong believer that there are easy to measure indicators of food system resilience which you can discover if you go into the system, go to your audience, go to the actors, and you will find a number of indicators which are easy to measure, collect and apply. And that's where you really have to reinvent a little bit your mail system, going away from data that have excluded important segments of society.
The private sector, that is a weak link, I think, in the productive safety net program. But it's a weak link that is an area of focus. What you see is that the public works programs is actually meant to develop roads as well to make these areas accessible. And when they become more accessible, then private sector is more amenable to actually coming in. So there are efforts to create market linkages, and also through some of the activities that are being done, for example, youth being encouraged to start entrepreneurial units, whether it's producing honey or they themselves actually being the links into markets to the communities. And so there are efforts being made, but it's an area that requires greater attention. And one of the drawbacks is the fact that where these programs are being implemented, the choice of those areas is because of how vulnerable those areas are in the first place. So it's not your first target of private sector to go into such areas. So what the programs are doing then of strengthening infrastructure in the area will actually catalyze, hopefully, movement of private sector in. One of the areas that is important is in the Sokoto Declaration, there are now efforts of bringing on board fresh food vouchers. And those fresh food vouchers are intended to also catalyze markets so that the people that can begin to produce in those areas, those that do not have money, can actually purchase from the ones that are producing. So it's meant to catalyze market activities in these vulnerable settings. And there are some indications of some positive movement in that direction as well. WFP is the institution to actually reach out to for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Namakolo. There are a couple of questions that are still of interest, and I'd like to lift out a question that Ben Fowler has been asking. And I quote, I would appreciate hearing more from the speakers on practical ways that this framework has changed the way they do and/or fund programming. So can you, I know that from your experience and from the examples you've been given, you've already started to dive into some of the answers that could be given, but I really want to kind of challenge you to come up with more practical ways that maybe also help illustrate for the audience in what way a food system resilience framework or thinking or an approach or a lens could actually be beneficial and change decisions that you make about interventions or about funding. Any of the panel who would like to speak to that and give us some more practical examples, please.
I think it's a clear cut for WFP. As you know, we responded to emergencies. So we are known as the largest humanitarian agency. But then using this concept and stepping back and say, wait a second, why do we do this every year? And every once now and then we respond to these emergencies, especially the rainy season. Why can't we take a proactive action and see how we can strengthen the resilience of these people when all these shocks happen? They can bounce back rather than depending on humanitarian assistance. So that has a lot of implications as well in terms of funding. So you need a kind of long-term perspective. And the more importantly, coming back to what framework, you've got to create, strengthen the connectivity, which means you need the partners on the ground. You need to have the networks that are working with you. I was talking about, making sure that you have a private sector in the mix that are providing the key solutions, for land rehabilitation, for inputs to make sure that the permaculture or some gardening is happening not only in schools, but also farmers who have access to rehabilitated land and they have access to water. So it's a kind of a shift in the way we do programming, especially for WFP, not continuing emergency response, but really taking a long-term perspective, which also require another type of funding. Back to you.
Maybe I can make reference to the work that Wageningen is doing with FAO. It's called RAPRO. It's a program that maybe didn't even start under the name of resilience or ABCD of resilience. That was well before, but it was truly established as a food system approach to systems in protected crisis, and that emerged as a really a multi-stakeholder approach to how do communities respond to multiple shocks and build from the bottom that resilience capacity from a community perspective. And I would like to refer to that as a kind of unique early approach that is now evolving into something that is also absorbing these learnings on ABCD, but also from other its own learnings on building resilience from practice. And that's quite a powerful program that is one of these examples where resilience is coming really to maturity in terms of building and achieving results, in terms of incorporating truly that resilience into the interventions that people incorporate and make more resilient to the shocks that they encounter.
Yeah, I think for me, just the emergence of the humanitarian development peace nexus is a realization of the fact that taking such an approach is actually useful. The example that I gave of Sokoto Declaration started off with 40 districts or Warada in the innovation phase. Based on the outcome of that approach, the program is now in expansion phase, and they are now having 240 districts. And that is supposed to scale up to 700 by the time the expansion phase ends. And then 2030, the idea is to go into a scale-up phase. So the fact that you started from an innovation phase and you are seeing these permutations of the numbers actually growing is an indication that the approach is working, and there is interest to expand it. What I find particularly encouraging for the Sokoto Declaration is that it's not just development partner funding that goes into it, but the government of Ethiopia itself is investing a lot of money into the process. And then picking it up as a game-changing approach in the Ethiopia Food System Transformation Roadmap, then provides that additional opportunity of potentially reaching scale. So not a funding agency at all. I am a researcher, but there are some positive things that are being observed. Resources is always a limitation, but you can see that government is putting money into the efforts because of the impacts that are being observed. Thank you.
And Herman, what I also observe is that when I have this kind of conversations in for example, Africa, it's really absorbed as something important and higher on the agenda. When I have these conversations in Europe, it's a kind of add-on where the conversations do not lead to challenging, for example, issues or topics of efficiency. Where I think that in Africa, it's quite understandable that efficiency and resilience are kind of mutually important now. That conversation does not take place in Europe yet. So in my understanding, we are more advanced in understanding the importance of resilience in Africa than we do in Europe. While in Europe, it's also very important because the shocks that we have witnessed in COVID have also affected segments in society in Europe, while we don't want to give up with that kind of paradigm of efficiency, which has dominated our food systems for actually too long, I believe.
So the challenges of resilience on the African continent are life and death situations, right? So I mean, there's strong understanding of how important it is for us to build resilience because of the outcomes of a lot of these shocks to us are quite devastating.
Thank you. I realize we have still about 3 minutes left before we're getting into our closing remarks. There's still quite a lot of questions that we haven't been able to address. Apologies for that, for also many of the people who've been asking these questions. I'd like to lift out one question here at the end, which is bringing out the governance lens. And let's try to think in what ways food system resilience can be linked to governance. And I think, Ona, you already referred to it when you started talking about partnerships and the importance of working in different types of partnerships as WFP. That's in a way, that's a governance type of action, I would say. But Flavio Linares has asked a question that I'll read for you, and then I will ask one of you to respond to it. Do you think governance and local organization frameworks are key elements in the matrix of food system resilience in order to integrate interventions? ? So it's about are governance and local organization frameworks key elements? Who would like to give some reflections on it?
Absolutely, they are. The governance around food systems transformation is really around avoiding trade-offs because there are so many entry points for food systems transformation. The multiple entry points also imply there can be multiple trade-offs. So having this visionary approach that was brought about by the UN Food System Summit, it's extremely important because the vision then aligns the different actors. So if your actions are not leading to that vision of resilience, then you know you are not contributing positively. For Ethiopia, they have actually developed a governance structure now. They've elevated food systems transformation as a coordination structure encompassing all food and agriculture related perspectives. There's a monitoring and evaluation framework that is being developed right now, and the idea is to monitor progress over time. The Sokoto Declaration is probably going to be the first place where the monitoring and evaluation framework is going to be tested. I am engaged in the team that has developed the monitoring and evaluation framework. But the other thing that I want to leave you with is there's a food systems resilience program that is being funded by the World Bank in different countries. Ethiopia is one of them. So looking at how that gets implemented will be very important, and bringing on board governance perspectives to actually make sure that the interlinkages that need to take place actually can help. And so local organizations then are actors that need to contribute, and then they need to be subject to a governance structure that not punitive, but that helps them to actually contribute better to the transformation process. Thank you.
Just quickly, if I may, Herman.
Yes,
I mean, I'm in the Sahel now, and you understand we have many issues related to governance as well, the recent coup d'etat and so on. But anyway, we all understand that food system is not just an agenda for the Ministry of Agriculture. It's for everyone. I mean, it's,
Yes.
there are many parts that are moving, and we need to make sure that we connect everyone to, because we can look at things from different perspectives, but also we need resources from different ministries and government. But also I wanted to mention the recent investment by the international financial institution like World Bank, working with the government closely, providing resources to enhance resilience in those countries. Very important to keep in mind. I like the question the person asked also about local organizations, because our role is to make sure that the food systems are protected during the emergency and after the emergency, even before the emergency as well. And to do that, you need all hands on deck. Let me just be specific about the Sahel. There are many countries that are under sanction. And sometimes they don't have that capacity to provide social protection. Now, the only organizations that are in place that you can work with to strengthen those systems or to respond to food emergencies are local organizations. So it's very important. And we have what we know as a two-tier system or twin social protection system, where government does something and also civil society does do something. When things that happen in the Sahel with the sanction, that's when you see that the buffering that Boato was talking about. You have a buffer, you have something that can work when the business as usual is no longer viable, especially in fragile settings. Back to you, Herman.
Thank you very much, Ones, and also Namokolo and Bart for your generosity in sharing your experience and your wisdom on this topic. And as we come to a close of this webinar, let me try and do the impossible job of summarizing. I also realize that in the question and answer, I see not only some more interesting questions, but I also see some interesting reflections and answers and contributions from some of the participants. And I'm really happy to see that there's a lot of knowledge in this community that we can benefit from. And as Bart already stated in the very beginning, this is a work in progress. And at the same time, we don't have an awful lot of time to develop kind of all the tools and all the principles in all level of rigor and detail as we would want to, given the enormous challenges that we are faced with in many countries that are in dire need in their food security situation or in their resilience of their food systems. So that's, I think, the dilemma, the trade-off that we need to manage as a community, where researchers will rightly say to us, give us more time to develop more diagnostic tools so we can actually say with a lot of precision, this food system is not resilient or is very resilient, and quantify somehow or use typologies to say something sensible about the resilience of food systems. That's all good and well, but at the same time, I do hear the call from Ones and Namukolo, and also the plea of Bart that, if we don't make this practically available for practitioners, researchers, and policymakers, then what's the use? And I think I'm quoting somebody else now and saying, well, the medicine might be more important than the diagnosis. And if that is true, what is the medicine? Do we know what works and what doesn't work? And I think Ones and Namukolo, you've given us examples, and also some of our colleagues in the chat, of where this approach can actually make a difference. And I think there's still a lot of work that we do need to do in order to help our programs become more smart in addressing resilience issues and doing it in a very effective and efficient way. I guess I can speak for all the panelists to say that, we are interested to collaborate with you on this. So if there's any additional thoughts or insight or plans for actions, then we'd be keen to hear from you and see where we can join forces. Now, as we wrap up, a couple of very practical remarks in closing. And I would like to thank, first of all, Namukolo, Bart, and Ones for sharing your expertise. And I would also like to thank ResilienceLinks for coordinating this webinar. Thank you very much. And if you want to continue to explore the topic of today, you can visit ResilienceLinks.org and follow them also on LinkedIn and on X, formerly Twitter. Also, keep out an eye on the email after the webinar. And that will contain the recording of today's webinar and also some additional resources. And when the webinar closes, you will be prompted to complete a post-webinar survey. And please take a few minutes to share your opinions with the ResilienceLinks team so that they can improve these events in the future. So thank you again, and I wish you a wonderful continuation of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.